last few months, we've been talking a lot here about discipleship and evangelism, and that the church is not supposed to be something that grows additionally, but it's something that's supposed to be multiplied in the earth. It's supposed to grow this way, and that's through discipleship and making disciples, the Great Commission. Go into all the world, preaching the gospel, making disciples of all nations. And so we've talked a lot about that, so I don't need to preface what I'm about to talk to you about because we've talked so much about it this far. But when I first came on as the lead pastor 3 years ago and we started doing revival groups on Wednesdays, we reformatted what we were doing on Wednesdays specifically to tailor what we do to equipping the saints and making disciples. But as I have observed what we have been doing on Wednesday nights, looking from the outside in, I began to think to myself, okay, Wednesdays is supposed to be for discipleship. It's supposed to be for the equipping of saints. But Wednesdays is effective. Like, everybody loves what is happening on Wednesdays. It's effective, but it's not efficient in making disciples. I began to look at Wednesdays and I began to think, you know what, if we're not careful, Wednesdays will just turn into another service. And we don't want to just produce another service, which can have the tendency to lean itself towards consumerism. Like, I just come and I get fed, and then nothing missional happens in your life the other 6 days of the week. Are people actually seeking the Lord in the secret place? Do they know how to do that? Are they on mission for Jesus? Like, we as a church don't just want to provide another service where we can come and consume, and then we don't give anything. We're not actually making disciples, right? We need to be disciples who are making disciples. And so I began to meet with some leaders in the church, and we began to dialogue about how could we shift Wednesday nights to become a place where discipleship truly happens and people really understand this is not a service. This is not something where you just come to consume. We're here to make disciples on Wednesdays. What needs to change with what we're doing on Wednesdays? And not a lot is changing on Wednesdays except for a few things. And you all should have received a paper from Kevin the usher that he passed out, and on the top it says Disciple Making Community. If you didn't receive that, just raise your hand. It will be helpful for you to look at as we go over this morning. So, how will Wednesdays be changing? It will be changing slightly in that it is still called revival groups, but when we meet in the groups, we'll be in the groups for longer and there won't be a teaching. So we will still have song worship on Wednesday nights and prayer and activation, all this good stuff that we love so much. But instead of the teaching happening and then groups happening, we usually do a teaching and then discussion groups for about 15, 20 minutes. We're not going to have the teaching because it's not a service. And we're going to go into our groups immediately, specifically for discipleship, to where the person leading the group will begin to ask questions to form discipleship in you. Meaning, how did you seek the Lord this week? What did your secret place look like? Who did you talk to about Jesus? To where there begins to be this rapport of accountability, right? In Luke, in the Gospel of Luke, after Jesus sends out the 72, does he not have them come back to him and report to him everything they did? So there's a reporting that must take place. This is discipleship. Go do what I've called you to do and then come back and report it to someone. Tell me how you've been being a disciple who makes disciples. And so what this model that we have put together is very different from the current church models in many ways. Discipleship does not happen in an 8-week course. It does not happen in a 4-week course. Jesus spent 3 years with disciples, and that was daily discipleship. And in our urban world today, most of us don't have the ability to spend every day with one another. So discipleship is going to be a much slower process. And some of us want to become disciples in 2 weeks. And that's not how the Lord works. The Lord is not a microwave. He is more like a crock pot or an oven. Okay? Right? He is not a microwave. And we can't expect to have we can expect to have microwave faith when we do like an 8-week course. But we can't expect to have lifelong sustaining faith from an 8-week course. It has to be a lifelong decision to be a disciple who makes disciples. So that's why this commitment is long. Now, this commitment is for everyone in this church to decide if they want to become a disciple who makes disciples. Will you make this commitment? From now on, when we baptize people in water, we will tell them, hey, you need to become a disciple. And this is the next step for you. And it's a big commitment, but it's going to ensure that you become a disciple who makes disciples. So this is what the commitment looks like. At the top of the page, it says, as a disciple of Jesus Christ, I long to do what Jesus did. Right? That's one of our 3 slogans here at Kingdom Church, to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did. So what Jesus did is he made disciples. So we're going to do the same thing. Therefore, I make the following 2-year commitment. Okay? This isn't an 8-week commitment. This is a 2-year commitment. And listen, if I can just get 5 people to make this commitment, that's enough for me. Because that will bring about more fruit for the kingdom than 20 people in a room on a Sunday morning or on a Wednesday night. 5 people truly committed to discipleship will bear more fruit in the earth than church attenders. Okay? And I'm not saying that you here today are church attenders, okay? But the first commitment is I commit to being discipled for 1 complete year by attending all Wednesday gatherings at Kingdom Church. So that includes revival groups, which will happen about 3 times a month, evangelism nights, which will happen once a quarter, and then equipping nights that will happen at the last Wednesday of every month. Equipping nights are going to look very similar to what has been happening on Wednesdays. Right? You're going to have a teaching. You're going to have worship. You're going to have activation and ministry equipping that's going to equip the saints for the work of ministry, similar to Ephesians 4, the 5-fold ministry, equipping the saints for the work of ministry. So it won't always be groups, but most of the time it will be groups, 2 to 3 times a month, and then we will do evangelism nights quarterly and equipping nights on the last Wednesday. I commit to reading my Bible, journaling, and praying 5 times a week. We've talked about this, the power of 4 or more. Believers who seek the Lord in the scriptures 4 or more days a week have significantly more spiritual growth. When you only seek the Lord 1, 2, or 3 days a week, there is minimal spiritual growth for the believer. So you're making that commitment. I will bring my completed journal entries to my discipleship group every Wednesday to share with my group what the Lord has been speaking to me. So the person who's discipling you is not going to open up your journal and see what you wrote and make sure you have all 5 entries. But we do expect there to be a level of honesty that like, hey, I didn't seek the Lord 5 days this week. I missed that. Right? Where there's a level of honesty and transparency. We try to make this discipleship commitment as minimal as possible. Like, we're not saying fast once a week, be at church every Sunday, don't do this, don't do that, don't watch this, like, we're keeping it as, we didn't want it to become legalistic. So we're trying to keep it as basic as possible, and through you seeking the Lord regularly, weekly, that the Lord would begin to do something in you through that. Number 3, at the end of my 1-year commitment of being discipled, I will then commit to disciple others for 1 year. This can be completed outside or inside the walls of Kingdom Church. So our long-term vision or mission for this is that this would just be a pathway for discipleship to begin to be modeled in your life, to where after you complete a year of being discipled, you will take what you have done and you will go do that with your coworkers on your lunch break once a week. Or you will go do it with your neighbors on your street at Starbucks once a week. That it necessarily doesn't have to be something that's completed in the 4 walls of the church, but you become missional in making disciples. And if you decide, hey, there's 3 new believers at the church that have shown up in the last year, I want to disciple those 3 people, you can do it on Wednesdays and have them be a part of that. But it's not something that necessarily we want to force to stay in the 4 walls of the church. We want it to be something that expands outward to where disciple making becomes a movement, not an organization in the earth, okay? We're not trying to organize that. What it says in italicized words there is, this is what makes the disciple-making community different from many other discipleship programs. Many programs focus on you becoming a disciple, but never actually launch you into making disciples. Okay, it produces consumerism. This year-long commitment, 2-year-long commitment, is so that we don't produce consumerism, where I come to get what I need and I never multiply making disciples out in the world. So it's going to launch you into becoming a disciple maker. We believe that we cannot call ourselves a disciple if we are not also making disciples. Okay, that's the truth. You can't call yourself a disciple if we are not making disciples. And so lastly, in the first 1-year commitment, I understand that I will be accountable to the person discipling me, right? So it's going to be expected that you're there on Wednesdays and that you're doing your journal entries. And then if that seems to not be happening, the person discipling you will lean into that and we'll ask questions and we'll have those kind of conversations. But we're inviting, because currently we don't have a youth ministry. So there's a few youth in here this morning. We're inviting you to be a part of this, to make this your youth group. And it's a way for you not just to come to church and have like a fun youth experience, but for you to actually be discipled, where you're seeking the Lord during the week and you have somebody who's walking through that with you. I believe it will totally transform people's lives if they make this commitment. Now, what does that mean? If you already attend Wednesdays or come to Wednesdays every once in a while, but you're like, I don't want to make this commitment, you still can come to Wednesdays. You will still be in a group, okay? You will still be a part of worship. You can still come to the evangelism nights. You can still come to the equipping nights. All of that is still for you. You just won't be a part of the disciple-making community, the group of people that have committed to this level of discipleship, to where the person discipling them is going to lean into that relationship. So if you don't want to make this commitment, you can come and go on Wednesdays as often as you want, right? But if you want to make this commitment, then there's a higher level of commitment to this, to really become a disciple who makes disciples. And so this is what we will be launching beginning Wednesday, April 10th. So that's only about 3 or 4 weeks away. And so over the next few weeks, I'll work on it this week. We're going to have more information on how to sign up. If you're interested in this, you will fill out an interest form online, and we will receive that. And then by the end of the next couple of weeks, depending on how many people have filled out the interest form, we will then place you in a specific group with a specific person who's going to disciple you for the next year. And then after that year, you will be able to go and make disciples also. Now, this is something that is starting April 10th, but it's going to be fluid in that people can join the year commitment at any point. So if someone decides 3 months from now, hey, I actually want to do this, they can jump into a group at any point. And we'll have on paper when somebody started and when their year is up. And it will just be this fluid thing that begins to happen in the life of our church, to have something that is truly making disciples. So I hope that the Lord begins to stir in your heart, like, hey, I want to actually do what Jesus did. And part of that was making disciples, preaching the gospel, evangelizing. And so it's going to take time. It's going to take me decluttering my life. It's going to take me reorganizing my priorities probably. But in order to become a disciple who makes disciples, I'm going to have to leave something behind to be a disciple. Isn't that what the disciples did? They left something behind to become a disciple of Jesus. And then after that, they began to make disciples in the church. And that's how the early church grew, because discipleship was taking place. And so that's what we're going to be offering on Wednesdays beginning April 10th.